In 1954, Rock Hudson's studio handed him a contract, not for a film, for a wife. The woman's name was Phyllis Gates. She was his agent's secretary. She later said she didn't fully understand what she was signing up for until the wedding was already being photographed for fan magazines. Rock Hudson was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He was also gay, and Universal Pictures intended to keep that secret for as long as possible. What happened to Rock Hudson wasn't unusual. It was policy. For most of the 20th century, Hollywood studios operated what amounted to a second personnel department, one that existed solely to manage who their stars appeared to love. They hired consultants, they pressured publicists, they brokered arrangements between actors who needed cover and actors who needed the same thing. Some of these arrangements lasted a weekend, some lasted decades, and the people inside them often had no clean way out. This is the story of the fake relationships Hollywood built, the real people they trapped inside them, and what it cost everyone involved. Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates. Rock Hudson's career was built on a specific kind of masculinity. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that looked sculpted. Women sent him thousands of letters a week. Magazines ran features about what kind of girl he was looking for. The problem, from Universal's perspective, was that there was no girl. There had never been a girl. By the mid-1950s, Hudson's homosexuality was an open secret within the industry. Whispers had reached the gossip columns, and at least one tabloid, Confidential magazine, was preparing to print something. Universal moved fast. His agent, Henry Wilson, who was himself gay and had built a client list largely composed of gay men he'd given heterosexual-sounding stage names, arranged the marriage to Phyllis Gates in November 1955. Gates always maintained she believed the relationship was real, at least at first. In her 2007 memoir, she described the early months as genuinely confusing, a marriage that looked normal from the outside but felt hollow in ways she couldn't name. Hudson was affectionate in public and distant in private. He spent long stretches away. When she pressed him, she got silence. They divorced in 1958 after 3 years. The studio got what it needed. Confidential never ran the story. Hudson's career continued for another 25 years, right up until 1985, when he became one of the first major public figures to disclose an AIDS diagnosis. He died 4 months later. He was 59. Phyllis Gates died in 2006. She never fully resolved, at least publicly, whether she had been deceived or had chosen not to see what was in front of her. Both things can be true at the same time. Tab Hunter and Debbie Reynolds, a manufactured romance. Tab Hunter and Debbie Reynolds never dated. They both knew it. Their studios knew it. What the public saw in 1955 was a perfectly timed series of photographs, arranged outings, and planted items in the gossip columns that tied two of Hollywood's most wholesome young stars together at exactly the moment both of them needed distraction. Hunter, whose real name was Arthur Gellion, had already appeared in Confidential magazine in connection with a raid on a private party that implied homosexuality. Warner Brothers needed to bury the story quickly. Reynolds, who was navigating the end of a real relationship, was available and willing. Both were under studio contracts that made cooperation the path of least resistance. The fake courtship ran for several months. Fan magazines covered it extensively. Young women across the country wrote to Reynolds asking for details. The whole thing dissolved quietly and without announcement, as these arrangements usually did. Both went on to other studio-managed public images. Hunter was later linked in similar fashion to Natalie Wood, another pairing that generated enormous press coverage and appears, based on accounts from people close to both of them, to have been largely constructed for publicity. Hunter eventually came out publicly in his 2005 autobiography. He described the studio system's management of his personal life as something he had simply accepted as part of the job, the way an actor accepts a costume that doesn't quite fit. Marlene Dietrich and her carefully maintained mystery. Marlene Dietrich's situation was different from Hudson's or Hunter's in one important way. She was not hiding her bisexuality from herself. She was hiding it from an American public that her studio believed would not tolerate it. Dietrich had arrived in Hollywood from Germany in 1930, already trailing a reputation for affairs with both men and women. Paramount handled this by doing something subtle. They didn't force her into a single sustained public relationship the way Universal would later manage Hudson. Instead, they managed her mystique. She was allowed to be unknowable. Her marriage to Rudolph Sieber, which had technically been ongoing since 1924, was used as a permanent background detail that kept her technically unavailable and technically respectable. The marriage, by all accounts, had functionally ended years before Hollywood entered the picture. Sieber and Dietrich lived separately, on different continents, for much of their married life. Yet, the union was never dissolved. This gave Dietrich freedom to conduct her actual relationships, which included long affairs with women such as Mercedes de Acosta, largely off the record. Sieber cooperated. He had his own life. The arrangement suited everyone except, arguably, the historical record, which spent decades describing Dietrich primarily in terms of her relationships with men. Montgomery Clift. No arrangement could fix what the studio couldn't see. Montgomery Clift never had a studio-arranged marriage. He resisted every attempt to manage his public image in that direction, and the studios largely gave up. What he had instead was something more damaging in its own way, a career conducted under constant pressure to be something he wasn't, with no arrangement to take the edge off and no protected cover story. Clift was gay at a time when that fact, if widely known, would have ended his career immediately. He managed it through a combination of discretion, close friendships with women who accompanied him publicly, and an increasing dependence on alcohol and prescription drugs that the people around him found easier to accommodate than to challenge. His friendship with Elizabeth Taylor is the most documented of these relationships. Taylor was one of the few people Clift trusted completely. When he was disfigured in a car accident in 1956, crashing his car on a dark road after leaving a dinner party at her home, Taylor reportedly ran to the wreck and held him until help arrived, at one point removing a tooth lodged in his throat to keep him from choking. She stayed close to him for the rest of his life. Their relationship was real. It was also useful in ways neither of them probably articulated. Taylor's proximity gave Clift a credible female companion in a world that required one. Clift gave Taylor, who was navigating her own string of very public marriages, a male friend who was reliably devoted and reliably undramatic in the way romantic partners never were. Clift died in 1966 at 45. The official cause was a heart attack. He had been drinking heavily for years. He never resolved his relationship with Hollywood on terms that were honest, because honest terms were not available to him. Cary Grant and Randolph Scott. Cary Grant and Randolph Scott lived together for 12 years. They shared houses in Santa Monica and Beverly Hills through much of the 1930s. They were photographed together constantly. Fan magazines ran features on their domestic arrangements, framed as charming bachelor companionship. The official explanation was economy, two successful actors splitting costs. This satisfied no one who thought about it for more than a moment, and most people apparently chose not to. Both men married during this period. Grant married Virginia Cherrill in 1934. Scott married heiress Marion DuPont in 1936. Both marriages ended within years. The men continued living together until the early 1940s, when social pressure and studio management appear to have made sustained cohabitation too difficult to maintain. Grant went on to marry 4 more times. He spent the rest of his life deflecting questions about the years with Scott. In one of his last interviews before his death in 1986, he described those years simply as some of the best of his life, without further elaboration. Scott, who retired from acting in 1962, gave almost no interviews about his personal life at all. He died in 1987. Neither man ever spoke publicly about the nature of their relationship. The arrangement with their respective wives bought them time and cover. Whether the wives understood what they were participating in has never been fully established. In Grant's case, at least one of his later wives, Diane Cannon, described him in ways that suggested a man who was deeply conflicted and emotionally unreachable, though she did not frame it in terms of his earlier life. Joan Crawford and Franchot, real feeling, managed purpose. Not every studio-encouraged relationship was entirely manufactured. Some were real relationships that the studio recognized as useful and then aggressively promoted beyond what either person might have chosen on their own. Joan Crawford met Franchot on the set of Today We Live in 1933. The attraction appears to have been genuine on both sides. Crawford was already a major star. Tone was a stage actor from a wealthy New York family who considered film work beneath him. MGM saw the pairing as potentially valuable. Crawford's fan base combined with Tone's refinement might soften her image, which by then had accumulated some rough edges. The studio pushed the relationship into the press constantly. Crawford gave interviews describing Tone as the love of her life. By the time they married in 1935, the wedding coverage was so extensive it functioned as its own promotional event. The marriage lasted until 1939, ending after what Crawford later described as years of Tone's jealousy over her more dominant career and status. The relationship was real, but it had also been shaped and amplified by the studio until neither Crawford nor Tone could clearly identify where their actual feelings ended and the managed performance began. That confusion appears to have contributed to the deterioration. When you've been performing a relationship for an audience for 4 years, it becomes difficult to locate the private version underneath. Crawford went on to 3 more marriages. She discussed tone in later interviews with a mix of genuine feeling and careful revision. He largely avoided discussing her. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor, the studio's perfect pair. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor married in 1939. MGM and Paramount had been maneuvering towards this outcome for at least 2 years prior, planning stories, arranging appearances, and managing press coverage in ways that made the relationship feel inevitable by the time it was announced. Taylor was one of MGM's most valuable young properties, and the subject of persistent rumors about his sexuality. Stanwyck was a major star at a different studio who had her own complicated personal history, including a previous marriage and a son whose adoption she had handled in ways that attracted gossip. The studio logic was clean. A union between them would neutralize multiple problems simultaneously. What makes the Stanwyck-Taylor story harder to categorize than some others is that the relationship appears to have contained real affection alongside its utility. People who knew both of them described genuine warmth between them in the early years. The trouble was that the studio's management of the marriage was so thorough that even the couple's private dynamic was affected by it. Taylor later described feeling that his entire public identity, including his marriage, had been decided by other people. They divorced in 1952 after 11 years. Taylor remarried. Stanwyck never did. She described Taylor, years after the divorce, as the love of her life. He was more guarded in return. He died in 1969 at 58. Stanwyck outlived him by more than 20 years and spent some of that time revising the story of their marriage in ways that suggested she was still trying to understand what had been real inside it. The lavender marriages. When the arrangement was mutual, the most functional version of the fake marriage in classical Hollywood was what people inside the industry sometimes called the lavender marriage, an arrangement between a gay man and a gay woman, or a gay man and a willing straight woman in which both parties understood the terms and both received something from the deal. These arrangements worked better than the ones studios imposed from the outside because they were, at some level, consensual. Both people knew what they were walking into. Both maintained their actual private lives while presenting a workable public face. If you want to keep going down this road, there are more of these stories than any single video can hold. Leave a comment with the name you think belongs in this conversation, and don't forget to subscribe if this kind of history is what you come here for.